As a pastor, you've got to be willing to let go of some things. I don't mean let go. I don't mean, hey, go take this enrollment, never want to
Right.
hear from you again.
No, don't want that.
No, whatever you do, you're going to validate these people. You're going to put your covering over them.
Hey everyone, welcome to AMN Conversations, where we just have a conversation. We just talk about some things that we see or think worth talking about. I get to again sit here with our superintendent, Dr. Ken Drawn, who I just call Pastor Ken because I think
Absolutely.
pastor is almost more important than a doctor.
Oh,
But
absolutely.
we'll go with that. And then I am Michael Harris. I'm a U.S. missionary with Church Mobilization, and I drive around and I see a lot as I drive around this state. And we were actually talking maybe in the previous podcast or even before we started talking, just how diverse and cultures and area Alabama is. And so I see things that bring questions to my mind. And even though I know that we were just joking about being 40 and I'm old, but I'm really too old to be young and too young to be old. But I've only really been doing vocational ministry for about 12, I think 13 years. So I still feel really young. And I have a lot of questions. And so I see a lot of things. And so I thought if I have questions, it'd be a good conversation piece. So today, things I see is good news is we have churches that are growing.
Absolutely.
They are expanding in their communities. I see it in the urban. I see it in the rural. I see it in everywhere in between. There's growth. And the question comes from when you're growing, how do I staff this ship? How do I make sure I got the right people on the bus and all that? Not just in, we'll get into actual hiring and paid positions, but that even goes in just to key leaderships as you're rolling, whether you're launching a church plant or you're taking over an established church or you've had a growth. How do you hire and empower leaders? Because I think that's an important topic.
Absolutely. As we covered on an earlier conversation here, the whole thing of, first of all, who are you? When we say, how do you do this? You're a pastor, you're a shepherd. And so being a shepherd, you've got a flock, and Jesus talked about taking care of the sheep, taking care of the flock. You're an under shepherd under Jesus, which means whatever you do is in the oversight of Jesus. I used to tell the people when I pastored that Ephesians chapter 4, if you read the 11th verse, you realize I'm really a gift to you, and I would laugh, tongue in cheek, because the word says, and Jesus gave gifts unto men, and one of that fivefold is pastor, which is a shepherd. So as the local pastor, and we'll talk about staffing, building team, one of the first responsibilities you have is to become the under shepherd under Jesus, to take care of the flock. Now, what happens to a shepherd in the day of Jesus when the flock grew? They had to get help because you can only take care of so many sheep at a time because things are going to happen to those sheep. You're going to have enemy of the sheep. So as a pastor, again, I shared a little bit last time we talked. I went into a church of 35 people. The second week I had 30. I got rid of 5 people in 1 week. I don't know how I did that. But as we grew, as God blessed the church, as we hit those markers, then you begin to realize, hey, there are more sheep in this fold than there used to be. What am I going to do? Now, there are a lot of indicators out there you can read because there is a zillion works on leadership.
Yes.
There's new ones coming out all the time. Man, there's so many works on leadership. Which I don't know if we're leading the ship real well sometimes, but there's a lot of work on leadership, a lot of stuff in every form. And there are a lot of formulas, when do you need to add and when do you need to do this? I think before we begin to think about staffing pay-wise, we need to begin to talk about staffing volunteer-wise.
Right. And I think real quick, I just had this thought because, again, my brain just works this way. If you are a staff pastor or leader of a volunteer of a ministry in your church, you may say, okay, this conversation's not for me. But really, as growth happens, like your ability to staff volunteers and anything under your ministry would apply as well. Whether you're a youth pastor as a paid staff, but your youth ministry is now hitting 100 students, you're going to have to empower key leaders to step in and help you pastor, though. So please don't just turn this
Absolutely.
off and say this is for lead pastors only. If you are leading a ministry, I think there's some things here that will be able to help you today. Maybe not the paid stuff, unless you have a really good budget for your ministry, but
Yeah, and the average size church in this fellowship is under 75.
correct.
So we're not a big church fellowship in the nation. Now, you may be pastoring a church of several hundred, and you probably don't even need to hear this. I don't know, but I'd love for you to hang out here with me a minute, because
Yes.
you may have some ideas you could put in the comment section here
Right.
that can help people. But there are a lot of formulas out there on when you do these things. I want to encourage you, as the local pastor, the wisdom is know your flock, know your church, and understand their needs. You have to sense. One of the things when I was doing my doctoral work, I'll never forget reading, and these three guys spent a year and a half, quit their jobs, and went looking what does the real church look like in the world.
Right.
And one of the things that came out that these guys were just the aha moment is they said pastors smell like sheep. In other words, churches that are thriving, that are doing. Now, let me be careful, because you can have a crowd and not be a church,
Right.
because they're ecclesia, the definition, understand what that is. So you can have hundreds or thousands of people and still not be following the principles, because there is a New Testament paradigm for church that's so important. And if you've left that paradigm, you've got to go back there. And that's why, I'm not trying to get off the subject. I'm trying to bring back around, because if you're going to look at building a team, you look at the corporate model or you look at the church model, and they're not exactly the same. As a shepherd, you should always be growing new shepherds. Shepherds beget shepherds. Sheep beget sheep.
Right.
So a shepherd needs to be looking. There are times when my church was under 50, back in that day, we sat on the platform. It was a style back then that everybody sat on the platform. I don't understand it. It looked like we had the king chairs. But that was the style I inherited, and the church had those till we changed that. But I would look out and just pray and ask the Holy Spirit, who is there out there I can touch and say, hey, come on, walk with me.
Right.
Look and begin to study and prayerfully look for people you can pull in as volunteers on your team. Because I'm going to tell you, once you hire and pay, it's easier to hire than fire.
Right.
So you want to make sure that you've got the people. So I think Michael, it's in layers. One, in a smaller church, and then even you go into larger churches when you begin to have youth ministries, student ministries. You've got children's ministries. You may have senior adult ministries, single ministries. You may be branching out, and you may be having churches within the church or flocks within the flock of sheep. Then you're going to take that same principle again. Most youth pastors or student pastors are not going to go hire three guys. You're going to look to begin with volunteers.
Right.
You may later. We had full-time youth and then went into part-time with the youth, but that doesn't happen immediately.
Right.
You have to grow to that place. I think we're talking about staffing. I think one of the first things you need to do as a pastor, at whatever size you're at, begin to pray and say, God, who is there out there that I can download my heart and vision into, that will take it and run with me and help me reach this community?
So from pastoring, you've done this. So let's say, in a practical sense, I'm pastoring a church. I've been pastoring 6 months, and we're a healthy church, and we're starting to experience growth. And right now, it's my spouse and I. We've been doing everything. What are some of the metrics, or what are some of the things that you would be looking for? Okay, where's something, because you're doing it all right now.
Right.
I got to start handing things off. So before you can hire or even empower a volunteer, you need to know, what is it that I'm going to let go of? And so how do you identify that area in your church?
I think you have to ask those questions. Okay, here's who we are, and here's where my heart is and where we're going. So how do I, as a pastor, you've got to be willing to let go of some things. I don't mean let go. I don't mean, hey, go take this and run it. Never want to hear from you again.
No, don't want that.
No, whatever you do, you're going to validate these people. You're going to put your covering over them, and the pastoral covering is going to be extended to them. And I think you decide, where are we going? And don't wait till you get there. Look ahead of time. Begin to ask yourself this question. Okay, where do we want to be in a year from now, or 2 years from now, even 6 months from now? And then begin to look at, who have I got to help me get there? I would take people and have them come over after a service and have cake and coffee at the house and talk to them about, hey, have you noticed this? Have you sensed this? And yeah. And you create an excitement, and they can feel that you're trying to birth something in them. You're trying to cultivate in them to help you do that. That's that leadership pipeline you're developing. And then you begin to, table conversations are so important to get there. We talk about your former pastor, who was a staff guy. This is a couple that visited our church.
Right.
I reached out to them and sat down with him and just said to him, hey, I've got this going on, man. You've got the skill set. Come help me do this. And he's like, what? But I think sometimes if you pray and God's giving you this unction to reach out and reach to someone, he's already dealing with them.
Right.
He's dealing with them ahead of time. So you begin. But once you begin to build it, don't delegate and let go. You want to continue, have an ongoing training and mentoring. And even when I had volunteers doing stuff, I made sure I walked through the room when they were doing something so they knew that I was on their side.
Yeah, actually I wrote this down as we're going how to delegate but not micromanage, because there's a thin line there of like I'm letting you, empowering you, but we think of delegate as it's yours, like you said earlier. You don't want to do this, it's yours. You run with it. All there. So but also to be in the room and not let them make decisions. So what does that process look like to slowly back off of? Let's use this for example. I'm bringing in whether it's a part-time paid or just someone in our church is going to start doing worship, and me and my wife are going to stop doing worship.
Yeah. How
do I walk that out through that process healthily?
I think, first of all, you've got to do a visionary download. They've got to know what your vision is for the church. They've got to understand that. It's so important. And you talk about extremely important. It's the worship part of the service. They've got to know, what's your heart? Pastor, you have to say to them, here's what I intend for worship to do in this service. Here's my plan. This is my expectation. What you're doing and what you're creating. And I don't want to, we don't have time to get into what I think worship ought to be in the church. Be careful here, Ken. But I think what you're asking me specifically is, how do you delegate, how do you pass on, and how do you release and back off? I think expectation.
Managing expectation,
Yeah, have expectation, and expectation demands almost inspection, to kind of watch what's going on and speak into them. Don't just get frustrated because they're not doing it. Go back and speak into them. Hey, man, you're doing great, but here's what I'm looking for. Let's kind of hone this thing this way. And you celebrate them. You do celebrate them. And worship is such a interesting part, because it's an emotional ministry, because the people, whoever's leading worship, is pulling their emotions and bringing them into this place. I think it's important. I had a staff guy who was actually paid full time that was doing worship. Great, gifted guy. This guy he was gifted in music, but he found himself in his own prayer closet at the piano. And I had to say, hey, man, you've got to be able to speak into them, saying, this is wonderful, great for the house, but hey, let's pull everybody in the room into that place with you. You've got to keep coaching them. You've got to keep the expectations out there. And you don't want them to just start here and let it go. You want to get them to raise the bar and move on. They may be a 4 and you want them to get to a 6 or 7 or 8. So I think the thing is you don't delegate and walk away.
Right.
You hand something to someone and you tell them, hey, I'm giving this to you, but understand my fingerprint's going to be on it, because I'm pastoring this whole house. And so there are times I may speak into this. Don't get upset. Don't get hurt. I'm loving you through it, and we're going to get there together. Volunteer teams can feel sometimes like, oh, they don't appreciate me. You've got to love and appreciate. But even though they're volunteer, legally, they're called non-compensated employees.
Right.
So, they are still a legal part of the system. but you just want the feedback, and that's going to require time. You're going to have those conversations, especially early on, more of them, because we're using worship. If you just had a worship service, it's always great the next day to say, hey, man, let me show you all this stuff. How do you think you did? What do you feel? Let's
Right.
talk about how that looks. So I think it is releasing with expectations and also supervision. You're going to still be there, not micromanaging. You don't want to do that. In the early part, when my kids were learning how to ride a bicycle, yeah, I ran along beside them.
Right.
I would put my hand out, but there came a point when I realized I don't need to put my hand there anymore. I think they get the balance of ministry, and you just attaboy them from that point, and your hands don't have to be on it anymore.
I'm going to walk into this next part, and with the bad example first, and then we'll get to the good. But what are some of the dangers of not vetting a leader?
Oh, yeah.
Not even just the moral problems, just not knowing them. Maybe you think that you have vetted them enough, and then find out they weren't ready. What are some of the dangers of that? And then we'll talk about how to avoid that.
Yeah, I think extremely. I remember years ago, when you live as long as I have, you've got years ago. I remember years ago, the idea was give somebody a Sunday school quarterly, put them in a room, and they're a teacher.
Right.
That does not.
Sink or
A
swim.
book doesn't make you a teacher. A title doesn't make you a minister. So I think the thing is, you've got to vet them. You got to vet them in the prayer closet. You've got to really pray and ask the Holy Spirit to reveal and show you, because once you release somebody into something, everybody's saying, hey, this person's okay because Pastor put them there.
Right.
So you have validated that person. Your stamp of approval is on there. So it's extremely important. Don't get volunteers just because you need somebody
Right.
in a room or at an event or whatever. Be very careful. And early on, don't give them a title. Just get them to volunteer and go do
Right.
something.
It's easier to give a title than it is to take a title.
Yeah, absolutely. I won't go there.
Yeah.
But you want to, but it's extremely important to vet them. Because I'm going to tell you, some people I know early on when we were, running 50, then 60, then less than 100, people just show up and they want to help.
Right.
You got to be so careful because people will bring emotional and spiritual viruses into your church. They'll bring attitudes and things from somewhere else that they didn't get fixed. So it's extremely important to find out who somebody is.
So I feel like you're saying, and tell me if I'm hearing this right. While talent is important, we have those people that are like, and I'm going to be careful, but like Saul's, like they are the head taller than everyone else. They're skilled. They look great. It seems like a natural fit, but talent isn't alone going to be a good vetting. You want to, so I guess making sure theologically, doctrinally, they align. You want to make sure that they are, I'm assuming, how they will last. Are they going to be a flash in a pan, then disappear on you?
Yeah.
So what brought them to your? So what are some of the markers you're vetting?
Right. I think a couple of years ago in our regional tour, Dr. Tennant dealt with the gifts of the Spirit and the fruits of the Spirit.
Right.
And I don't know that I'd ever seen it like she explained it, but the fruits are extremely more important than the gifts. So I think the talents are important, but the behavior, demeanor, mindset, temperament of the person is more important than the skill set.
Right. Because that's what'll.
That's what'll kill you. Rarely is it the skill set that fails.
Right.
It is a behavior. It's an attitude. It's an unresolved something. So, boy, you've got to really, I've said this before preaching. Hey, we're not God's fruit inspector. Maybe we need to be more of a fruit inspector.
When you step into leadership, there's a different standard, and I think the Bible's very clear. Like you're held to a different standard with leader, whether that's a full-time vocational thing, but even just a Sunday school teacher, you're on a different level than our life group leader now, or
And everybody
or
in
whatever.
the house
Yeah.
looks at you differently.
Right. So there needs to be some vetting there.
It's funny though. You say that, and sometimes one of the easiest volunteers we get is an usher to take up the offering.
Right.
And not all churches take up the offering anymore. And then I've seen churches that have 6 ways to give. So it's according to how you do it. But anytime you have people stand before the people or stand in front of the people, somehow you have validated that person. So you want to make sure whatever you're putting your validation on is going to represent who you are and the philosophy of the house that you're leading.
Right.
So again, building a volunteer team is important. There are a lot of ways to do it. I think one of the greatest ways, you look at Jesus, Jesus walked up and said, "Hey, Matthew, follow me." I think as a pastor, sometimes you got to put your hand on somebody and say, "Hey, you know what? I've been praying and God's put you on my heart. Let's talk about this." But you don't, again, as you said, Michael, earlier, you don't just say, "Hey, go do this. I don't want to hear anything from you."
Well, and I want to end talking about the hiring because I feel like that's a smaller portion. But let's say I'm about to launch a ministry and volunteer, but even maybe hiring from within to fulfill a ministry. Let's say I'm pastoring for the past year in the church. What are some things I should have been looking for, or who to tap that may be ready to take a bigger step in leadership, whether that's to be an elder or deacon or trustee, or even just a minister to minister in a specific ministry? What are some of those things I'm looking at to identify leadership in my church and people?
I think, again, one of the big things is the life of the leader, the prayer life of the leader. You have to be a person, if you don't pray, you get prayed on. You have to be a person of prayer because you've got to be looking for the sensitivity of the Holy Spirit. If you're looking from your just skill set and mindset of what talent looks like, you could choose the wrong person. I mean, we go back and look at what happened in the Bible and how choices were made.
Right.
The prophets wanting to choose all the sons, but the wrong one.
Yeah.
David's out in the field.
Yeah.
And, we look for what appears to the eye to be talent. Be very careful right there when you're looking. As a pastor, be praying because you know where God's taking the church and what he wants to do with the church, because what is the church? It's a place where heaven downloads and sends out. It becomes the exit strategy out of the building to go. I forget who it was one time talked about, I'm trying to remember, one of the guys back in the day that was sitting in a church in California, and they were talking about reaching. And finally he said, "When are we going to quit talking and go do it?"
Right.
So I think that's the thing, is we want to go do it. And there are going to be people that surface that you can pull near you and use. One of the great things, I made hires inside the house many times. And then I made hires outside of the house more than I did in. But I'm telling you, the ones that moved along from volunteer, I would tell guys, "Hey, you know what?" And once we had gotten to a point to where they'd been picked, they'd been watched, they'd been coached, and I knew who they were, I would say, "Now, if you will create the need, I will hire you."
Right.
You create, and they would laugh and say, "What do you mean?" I said, "Well, X number of family units can pay for your salary. Let's create a ministry." We're not looking at people with money signs, but when a guy creates the demand,
Right.
then you can do something.
Right. So one of the other things I think is important to point out, which I just had this thought as well, I'll walk it out, but you may be mentoring and coaching someone that you think in your flesh that they may be stepping into a ministry in your church, but maybe you're mentoring and coaching someone and bringing someone up to leadership that God may be calling to plant another church over here or to go be a minister in another church. And you're like, but it's important to know that God can put in the hand and take out of the hand. So that's important to remember as well. And then that follow that along is like, so you talk about your youth pastor, Pastor Jenkins, who you poured in, coached or whatever, but then he ended up leaving to take a church in New York and then eventually came back and pastored Mobile, who then I was under. So like, you don't know how far that'll go. Like we're sitting here and the person that you coached and mentored was my coach and mentor. And so these trees just kind of...
It's reciprocal.
To go. Right. It's amazing how God can... So don't be afraid to minister, to mentor someone for them to then go pastor another church. Like that's not a failure on your part. God may be bringing someone else in to come to you. And you're looking for faithfulness. You're looking for the fruit of the Spirit more than the gifts of the Spirit, because the gifts can come if you're being true to the fruit.
Yeah, they can. You want that fruit element in there. That's extremely important. because those are the things that either can damage or hurt your family.
Right.
And you got to understand, if you coach, mentor, and bring somebody along, they're not yours anyway. You're an under shepherd, they're an under shepherd, we're all under him. And you know, if they don't belong there, they don't need to stay there.
Right.
You know, if God wants to go use them. I mean, I had a youth pastor, became associate pastor, that went and planted a church, and probably 40 to 50 people went with him. But God honored that and blessed and took care of him, took care of us. I think we have to realize it's about the king. It's not my kingdom.
Right.
It's not my church. It's his.
Right. And then one last thing before I jump into my question I have about hiring paid staff, but it's important to look at the family, the spouse, the kids as well. Not that you should judge them by that, but when you step into ministry, whether they are at the church working or they just are at home, either way, that dynamic affects everything.
Absolutely.
So the spouse and the family need to be on board with what's going on in the church.
Yeah, if the family doesn't stay healthy, the ministry won't stay healthy.
Right.
It's extremely important that the family is allowed to stay healthy. You want to make sure, as you're pulling that person along, that you're encouraging that person to be a part.
There's some moving going on next
Yeah,
door.
we
to
got
us.
some volunteers here.
We'll
doing
figure
some
that out.
stuff.
Hopefully,
Yeah.
we can edit that out.
That is
in
not.
sound.
That is not an earthquake. That's not an earthquake.
But okay, so about hiring, we've talked about hiring and bringing from within. This last little bit, something I have very little experience with. What are some ways that I can go maybe find somebody outside my church? What are some resources available? I have an opening. I need a youth pastor, a kids pastor, a worship pastor, simulation life group, whatever role here, and I want to hire from outside. What are some resources, or how do I start that process?
Well, it's important. I did an article here a couple months ago on ethics, and it's extremely, let me go there first, the ethical side of this. When you are looking to staff your church, you're not quite looking like you do at a company who's going to look across town and see a great employee who won't have to move. They can stay in the same place, but they can come over to your place and do at your place what they're doing at that other place and help you. There's an ethics to this thing of when you're going to start looking for a staff person. Of course, you've got to know what your job is you want to fill and what your budget is you want to do that. All those things you work out ahead of time. And again, we're not going to take time today to look at the formulas for how much money should be spent on this, that, and the other. That you can figure out. And if you need to know that, we can walk you through that on a one-on-one if you need to reach out in the comments. But the first thing you got to do is when you start looking, once you get the ethical side and understand, hey, it's not right. And I had people reach to my staff behind my back. They sure didn't talk to me and try to hire them out. And, and I would tell my staff, hey, if you don't belong here, go. You do what you feel like God's telling you. I understand that. But pastors need to be ethical in that whole arena of hiring. Now, with that said, that's important because we got to live in this kingdom together, and it's not my kingdom; it's His kingdom.
Right.
We're in this thing together, and I know some people don't act like that. Man, we've got. I want to be careful here, Michael, because I'll get branded. But there is a lot of church marketing going on, and a lot of stuff going on, and there's nothing wrong with doing the best you can in your community, but you don't cross the line of ethics. You've got to be ethical. Now, when you start looking to hire, and you got all those parts and pieces in place, then the wisdom is know what you're looking for. And then there are sources. I would reach out to friends. I'd reach out to other networks, districts, and talk with leadership there, guys who are in the know, guys even in our fellowship that were traveling all over the nation, say, hey, I'm looking. What do you see out there? Who do you know out there? I think that's important. But once you begin to look and pin that down, is one of the things you want to do is you want to vet that person properly. You definitely, I know, hey, this is a star player over here, and I can tell you the horror stories of star players that brought the stars down on something because they were not ethical. They had stuff in their closet. You have got, I'm gonna tell you, I deal with churches and I deal with boards a lot, and I always say, you better follow every reference on that sheet
Right.
and ask anybody on there, hey, do you know anybody else I could call? Because it's extremely important in the litigatory world we live in that you don't hire someone that's going to cause the walls in your house to fall. I know you
Right.
say that sounds scary. No, that's due diligence. That's using the wisdom to vet someone out, talk to the references, and find out who they are. And then once that's going to come a little bit after your time. You're going to talk with that person. You may sit down at a meal with that person. You've just got to talk. Is this person going to work? And then you want to vet everything to make sure it's going to be there. That's extremely important.
Right.
And I may be going too far on this question.
Well, no, that's good because these are sometimes we never even had to hire someone before, and if you've never been in the corporate world of hiring in the church world, which is different, but still that
Right.
whole process, it's something that we don't experience much. And so, like I hear you saying, like resources is your local networks. Like reach out to your pastor friends, reach out to the network here. Whether if it's the youth pastor,
Absolutely.
you have Ben Russell. If it's a kids pastor, Pastor Vent over here, you've got all these resources
Yeah.
here. And like you and the other guys, other directors are traveling around the state, so you know people and can put in contact. And then also that's your network to say, okay, do you know anything about this person? But also don't be afraid to, if you know people in other networks and districts, to reach out to them too. Is that what I hear you saying?
Absolutely. Hey, yeah, reach out to your circle of friends and acquaintances and people who might know. I mean, all they can tell you is, I don't know, but you want to do that. And then, our fellowship has a site now that you can go on and look. And boy, I hate I don't have that with me, but you can go out to ag.org and search out there. But yeah, there's a site. There are places for people to put jobs they want. They're out there. And I've seen people use Facebook for that. I've seen them use Instagram, different places to just say, hey, we're looking. I just saw one of our local churches in the state had out on Facebook, we're looking for a pastor.
Right.
So now it's a connected world. So there's a lot of ways. But hey, the find is good, but make sure you just get all that background and all that stuff. You just want to know that you know and you know her, that who you're getting is not going to hurt your church.
So I'll wrap this up as we come getting close here on time. But so let's say I've vetted all that stuff. Do you bring them in? Let's say they're coming from out of state or out of town. Would you bring them in to just have dinner with you, or maybe you go to them first? How would you?
Whichever way. Now we have the beauty of Zoom, FaceTime and Zoom and other sources, Google Room and so forth. Yeah. We've got all these sources that we can do that, digitally, online. But then you want to have the on-site. Yeah, I think you want to work with that person, connect with that person, immerse with that person first before you ever bring them on your site.
Right, and you need them to know what they're coming into as well. I'm assuming
Absolutely.
because if you're a different kind of culture or context than they're used to, and they come in and either them or the spouse or the kids are like, I can't live here. You need to encourage them, I'm assuming, to vet you out as well. Don't be afraid to let them vet you out.
You want them to do that because
Right.
you don't want them to get there and be disappointed. You don't want to get there and the spouse and the kids like, what has mommy done to us? You want that. You want you and your spouse to be able to sit down with them. You want to meet that family and talk. Then once you've gone through those layers and you're feeling really comfortable, with it, then you bring them on site, not maybe for an official, but just for a get acquainted to see the community and learn a little bit about the community. And
When do you bring your board or elders or trustees, like that layer of lay leadership you have, when do you bring them on in this process?
Okay, I think it's kind of how you do business at your church.
Right.
It's according to how that works. You're going to want your. And again, I tell people bylaws. Those are the rules. What does it say? What does
Right,
your
that's
rules
important.
say? How you work? But even if my rules said I'm in charge of everything and do anything I want, I'm going to want to bring my leadership team in there because they got to live together. They got to work
Correct.
together. And so at the point when you've had this time and you can feed this information back, then you're going to want to have a time when you're really serious. You're going to want to bring them together and let them have if you're serious about bringing this person in, then I would bring them in and have a meal with the leadership team so they
Yeah.
get to meet each other.
Because they have their own discernment and ability.
Absolutely.
Well, I think this is a lot of useful information. Like if there's other questions about hiring or things, you can use that comment section again, and we can get back to them or have this conversation later. If you have more questions or like in this moment, you're like, okay, this is what I'm looking to do. You're here available to our pastors.
Absolutely.
The other officers are here and would love to walk you through this, because I think getting hiring right, empowering our leaders right, helps us grow the church beyond what we can imagine into what God's dreaming for us.
And it's extremely important when a church is hiring that board, that leadership team is able to do these things as well. That's extremely, and you know, thankfully we get to spend time with Zooming with boards and stuff and talking about this. You know, the bottom line of this whole thing is you want it to be a healthy, fit hire so that whoever comes in is blessed and your people are blessed.
Right.
That's the bottom line.
Right, because again, you do this right, it'll bring growth.
Right. Absolutely.
If you do this wrong, it'll cause you a lot of headaches. But there's a good chance in this process you will do this wrong once or twice, and the key is to fall forward and learn.
Yeah. You know, easy to hire, hard to fire.
Right.
You want to be very careful. That's why you want to look at, you got to hear from God.
Right.
And even if you hear from God, doesn't mean the person you bring on is hearing from God like they should.
Right.
And but yeah, you kind of walk through that, and maybe this is for another time. But there are ways to mediate those issues.
Right. I'll say, yeah, that the dealing with staff and possibly firing or transitioning.
I used to call that staff infection.
Yeah, that's a whole different one, and we can do that maybe another time or go from there. But thank you again for answering some of these questions. Hopefully some of y'all have had similar questions, and this conversation's helped y'all as well. Would love to know what y'all think, or again, what other conversations you would like us to have.
Some of this stuff may not fit you, but you know, this can be great background noise when you're studying. Just put this on and yeah.
Hopefully. Well, thank you again for sitting down and having this conversation, and we will try to get it done in September in that busy schedule to have some more conversations.
Looking forward to it. Thank you so much, Missionary Michael, as I call you. Appreciate you,
All right.
man.
Bye, guys.